I also kind of envisaged using it by talking to all the other diasporas in Australia, for example, because for me, I kind of thought, why not benefit from the knowledge and the understanding of the people of these countries so far away, right on your doorstep?
Claudia Speidel is a marketing strategy consultant and educator. Through qualitative research methodologies, she draws on consumer insights to advise businesses in communication strategy, market positioning, and product development. She has extensive experience in cross-cultural communications throughout Europe and Australia, engaging with a wide range of industries including fast-moving consumer goods, education, pharmaceuticals, and tourism. During her career, she participated in various multinational communication campaigns and international product launches. Claudia has also worked as a business, marketing, and communication lecturer, developing and delivering subjects at a bachelor's level. Originally from Germany, Claudia has lived in 6 countries and traveled the world for her work and studies. Each country move introduced her to a new culture and language that was not her own, and taught her about the challenges and intricacies involved in cross-cultural communications. She often witnessed cultural and linguistic misunderstandings and/or missed opportunities to engage in a culturally diverse audience because the messages were not sufficiently nuanced to resonate with specific collective sentiments. It was these migrant experiences and her liminal position between cultures and worldviews that sparked her interest in cultural identities and their impact on attitudes, values, and behavior, which is the focus of her PhD research at the UTS School of Communications. Claudia is currently investigating the impact of the Australian Indian diaspora's cultural identity on their perceptions and preferences in sustainability. This episode of The Knowledge Mill was recorded in my office at UTS on October 5th, 2023. Show notes, including links to more information on some of the topics that Claudia and I discuss, can be found at theknowledgemill.com/episode 8. That's episode and the numeral 8. Hi, Claudia. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Greg. Pleasure to be here.
You are doing a PhD here at UTS. Can you tell us how you found yourself doing this?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Greg. I find myself asking myself that on a regular basis as the journey progresses. But honestly, I feel that the seed of the idea was planted many moons ago, many years ago, when I was doing my master's degree in journalism in the wonderful state of Colorado at the University of Colorado in Boulder. And I had literally just presented the defense of my thesis on the First Amendment and advertising self-regulation when my lovely supervisor turned to me and suggested that I continue on and, build on the topic and do a PhD with him on that, which I think couldn't have been worse timing, really. It's a little bit like asking, a woman straight after birth, so when is this little child going to get a sibling, right? So I wasn't all that impressed with the suggestion, and I also didn't feel that I could bear doing, something like 3-4 years on that topic again. So I decided to decline that offer. And I also was missing, home. I was, from Germany, had spent many years abroad, and felt that, the home was calling. So ironically, I went home very briefly and then, strapped on my backpack and started globetrotting the world for about a year, which was one of the best things I feel that I could have done at the time, because it, really helped get a perspective in terms of what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go and where I wanted to live. So it just gave me a chance to step back. But that said, I feel that Sam's or my supervisor's suggestion to do a PhD gave me that affirmation that it was actually possible. It gave me that endorsement that I was capable of doing it.
Sure.
was from a family where both my parents had just engaged in vocational training. So, we weren't really a university family, I would say. So it was something that remained with me. That idea, gave me that little pinch or that little niggle off and on as my life journey progressed. So that's why I say I feel the concept started many years ago, but it wasn't until, life came to a standstill in 2020 for all of us, with COVID, that I actually had the time to dwell on it a bit more, to think about the opportunities that it could give me, or, what kind of topic I could be doing. And I knew at that time I wanted to change my life. I had been working as a lecturer for quite a long time. I was, still working in strategic planning and researching. And I just felt, it's that time in my life where I think a change is in order again. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't until I came across some former colleagues who were obviously, in my age group. And they were doing a PhD as well. Or they had already started theirs. They had, one was already in the second year, the other in her first. And, they really said it was one of the best decisions they made. So that I think was that final, yep, okay, well, if they can do it, I can do it. And so I met up with the potential supervisor, because that's what one of my friends said. She said, you really have to shop around for your supervisor, make sure that you connect, that there's the right chemistry, that there's the interest. And once I found her, the ball was rolling. So here I am, heading towards my stage 3 in March. I've completed my findings on, and this is a bit of a mouthful, looking at how the integration of diasporic perspectives into the corporate shared value, or call it sustainability narrative, is an opportunity to promote sustainability itself. All right. So I think that topic will need unpacking, and if you bear with me, I will. But I just thought it might be a good idea if I explain why I gravitated to this kind of
please do.
A topic. Yeah. So first off, I think, as much as I studied journalism, I ended up, of course, driven or following, the love lane in Paris, France, because my partner at the time was living there. And so journalism was kind of out of the question. My language wasn't, at a level of being able to write an article in a newspaper or speak on TV or anything like that. So I ended up in a multinational advertising agency, servicing multinational clients. And most of them were selling fast-moving consumer goods, that is supermarket goods like, chocolate and cereal and detergents and, you name it, pretty much I did it. So the role involved a lot of research and a lot of trying to figure out what the consumer needs were, what their values were, what their beliefs were, and how best to, communicate or address those needs and wishes that they were telling me about, because I spent an enormous amount of time in focus groups and interviews, listening and talking to people to make sure that, we were tapping into what they wanted. And at the time, the agency that I was working in was structuring their departments around their clients, and the clients had this idea that it was, good economically speaking to create global messages, right? So instead of, addressing cultures and the values of the individual countries, they wanted to create these pan-European messages.
Right.
Which, you know, in itself, you'd go up. As long as the voiceover is right and the translation is right, it isn't a problem. But it clearly showed how complex it is to really hit that cultural nerve when you're trying to convey a global message. You know, it just is almost, I feel like saying impossible. I mean, if you think, for me, I think an Australian example that hits home or that everybody understands is when I think about the Where the Bloody Hell Are Ya? Australian tourism campaign, which they obviously, you know, were sending across the globe, and how, you know, it instantly got banned in the UK because it had the word bloody in it, and then it got banned in Canada because of the word hell. And then in Singapore, they ended up saying, "Where are you?" as opposed to, you know, the "Where the bloody hell are you?" So, I mean, translating humor is really difficult, right? Because it is such an emotional thing. It's so deeply ingrained in culture. So often what you end up is with these messages that get watered down to a point where, yeah, everybody gets it, but it doesn't really hit that nerve that you want. Yeah. So especially when you have a product that is so emotionally driven, right? Like traveling. Okay. So I was working in the food sector at the time, and I felt it the same thing applied, right? So if you're thinking about, let's say, a food product that is eaten by children that includes sugar, you know, in some cultures it's a big no-no, and all, you know, the message will be is about the other ingredients, right, that come with it that potentially have some nutritional value. Or, you know, and other cultures go, well, yeah, no, a bit of sugar for children isn't bad. They need energy, and, you know, it's a way to get them or keep them going. And so again, there were so many different approaches to something as little as sugar. It kind of shows that doing these blanket messages doesn't always work.
Yeah, it's easy to see how you wanted to use the word impossible.
Yeah, you absolutely. I mean, you know, and this doesn't even address the kind of misunderstandings that you can get when, you know, they translate things incorrectly, or the name has a, you know, very different connotation than in one country than it does in another. So, for me, it was just always a missed opportunity because, you know, we weren't tapping into, you know, the deep emotional spectrum of our audience. And frankly, I think if you want to convince somebody to do anything, you have to have a bit of emotional in there, right? I mean, a lot of products, you can argue, yes, if they're very technical, as long as there's a bit of a rational explanation that, you know, people can feed back, that's okay. But most products involve both the emotional and the rational. So for me, it was, very much that something that I took out of that. And I went on and I did it, you know, I moved on with work. I mean, this was the fun bit. You know, moved to London and then to Sydney and Milan. So everywhere I did this, though, it was the same pattern, right? Every time we tried to send this message across multiple countries, or the same message across multiple countries, it ended up being a watered down message that didn't have the oomph and the resonance that it could have had if we just had adapted it a little bit more, right? And I think that's kind of come back into the picture with quite a few marketers. But as a course of, you know, as a result of moving around, let's say, I also had the opportunity of, you know, experiencing all these different cultures, which was fabulous. You know, I was really the proverbial migrant since I've been an adult. Really, I moved countries, I think, 5 times, and every time it was into a country where, you know, it was not German. So no German was spoken. So I had to, adjust to the different languages, the different cultures. And it was that exciting, obviously, but also, it takes a bit of adjustment.
Absolutely.
That comes with it.
Yeah.
And I always say, if you want to be happy in the new place that you live in, it takes about 3 years. Kind of the first year to get over, where you're all excited about the newness. And then the second year you kind of go, oh, I kind of like it better where I came from. And then in the third year you understand that the mix isn't a bad one. So, it's kind of the philosophy I had after the fifth time of moving, and being somewhere for 3 years. But essentially, I feel one of the main things that came out of that is the fact that no matter where you go and no matter, how much you assimilate into your new culture, that home or that old culture kind of stays with you, right? So you take a double hat. You have this double hat that you wear that, as they say, a dual, social identity, because, no matter how much you empathize or understand and relate to the culture that you're living in, that old culture, that home, that mother culture always affects the way you think and the way you see the world, right?
Absolutely.
So then combining, my moving around and my communication, it just so happened that, every time I saw a message, not every time, but often when I saw a message, I'd go, oh God, that one really would not fly in Germany, or oh, this one would be really good in Italy. But do you know what I mean? Because a message is so different across different countries, and that kind of takes me back to why am I doing this topic that I mentioned earlier, how the integration of diasporic perspectives into the corporate shared value narratives presents an opportunity for sustainable development. I mean, first off, obviously, I think it's undeniable that the progress with regards to sustainable development has been quite meager at best. So over the
even though it seems like it's better than it used to be, but
yeah, for sure. And I think we need to take, the little steps as a step in the right direction. Of course. But when you hear, Antonio Guterres, the head of the UN at the moment, saying that what's happening with the Sustainable Development Goals or the progress is really pitiful, and his real earnest appeal to get more action, then you kind of wonder.
It brings home that we still have a lot of work to do.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, when you look at it, we're at the halfway mark of those Sustainable Development Goals that were introduced in 2015, and only 12% are on track to meet their targets.
Right.
So that's a bit disheartening, I think, right? So for me, it was, perhaps, is there something that's could be improved in terms of communication so that it resonates a bit more, so that, people are more engaged, and then, eventually from that engagement comes action. And hence, because I felt that, again, the diversity of cultures that had to get involved in this project, right, was so large, it was important to involve the cultures that I believed were less heard in the matter. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But, I mean, I suppose in the first instance, it may be necessary to unpack my topic a little bit more. There are a few terms in
walk
there
us through it,
that are a little bit unusual, I suppose, or less frequently used, I should say. So my research focuses on the Indian diaspora in Australia. And, whilst the word diaspora is becoming more frequent and is being used more often, I do often get the question, what is that actually? So originally, when you talk diaspora, it's in reference to the dispersion of populations into exile, like the Jewish population and the Armenian population. So it's really, originally it was connected to that victim experience, right? But nowadays, the term is really more commonly used with reference to migrant groups, but that retain a homeland orientation. So they're really very strongly connected to their homeland still. And importantly, they endeavor to maintain a group unity amongst them as a population. So, when I did my research with my Indian diaspora and asked them how often they connected with home, 3/4 of them talk with home on a daily basis or connect on a daily basis.
Right.
So there's, a big bond happening there. And it's that endeavor also to, maintain that group unity and that connection that has introduced this notion of diasporization being an active process. It's a social process that's driven by cultural shifts, as they say, and contexts, right? In the sense that as you are part of a diaspora, you have that possibility of living in the here and the there, right? It's that sameness and otherness, as they say. Or, I feel like simplifying it and just saying it's a bridge between the homeland and the host land, because they are such a key connection or key connector between the two populations. So for me, the diaspora became, apart from the fact that I identified with the whole hybrid identity aspect, because I had experienced it myself, I also felt that it was an incredibly relevant viewpoint, or worldview, and very unique, because as much as there are, of course, many diasporas out there, it is different to when speaking to a population that hasn't migrated, that is living still at home. The other reason why I thought speaking to diasporas was because as I wanted this to be an opportunity, or this project to be an opportunity to, to start little, i.e. by talking to the Indian diaspora, I also kind of envisaged using it by talking to all the other diasporas in Australia, for example, because for me, I kind of thought, why not benefit from the knowledge and the understanding of the people of these countries so far away, right on your doorstep, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
We don't, saves us from trying to, travel there. And also they have, as I said, that unique understanding of both the home and the host land. The other aspect of diasporas is that, of course, they are known to wield incredible financial power. As I found out, some of the low and middle income countries get 25% of their GDP through remittances from their diaspora, so from their people living overseas. Yeah, so they essentially couldn't survive without the remittances of their diaspora. And by the way, I think that is also a reason why, the reduction of costs of remittances is part of the Sustainable Development Goal to reduce inequalities, right?
Sure.
So it kind of speaks for itself in that case. But we're also speaking nowadays in terms of remittances, in terms of ideological remittances, in the sense of the transmission of political values and knowledge and skills that the diasporas can bring back to their home country. And I often quote the Indian Prime Minister, who at the first Pravasi Bharatya Divas, and I hope I said that correctly, which is essentially a celebration day for diaspora, for the Indian diaspora, which was started in 2003. And at that day, he said, "We do not want your investments. We want your ideas. We do not want your riches. We want the richness of your experience." And for me, that kind of said it all, because it's not only about money. It's also about the knowledge and the skill sets and the values that diaspora is taking on board whilst they're overseas, and retransmitting that to the home.
That maybe speaks to as well, because Australia's second largest export is education.
Yes.
Which
absolutely.
blew me away when I learned that.
Yes. Yeah, I know. It's often when you go through these figures, your jaws drop, right? Because of the numbers that you learn. Absolutely. So the Indian diaspora in Australia is obviously very important. It's, the second largest. It's growing at the fastest pace. On a worldwide basis, the Indian diaspora has 30 million people living overseas.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I think that's spread over 146 countries or something like that. But,
That's more than people who live in Australia.
Exactly. That's more than the Australian population. That is exactly what I was thinking. We're on the same wavelength. But, in itself, they are all a very diverse people, right? They speak different languages, practice different religions. Some of them are long-standing populations overseas, like in Fiji. They've been there forever, and they represent, I think, almost 50% of the population. Whilst in other countries, they're still relatively new, right? Like in Australia, where, they're just at almost 3%, 2.8% or something like that of the population. But as I said, fastest growing diaspora. Anyway, so for me, I like that. So tick that box in terms of, I wanted to do diaspora. That connected with me very well. They're very important group of people to talk to, and very influential and very unique. And so then getting to my next point, which was wanting to integrate their perspective into the shared value narrative that business is using at the moment, which is essentially so shared value, or creating shared value, which is abbreviated as CSV, is essentially the strategic integration of corporate social responsibility into the business model, so that it becomes integral to the way the business operates. And essentially, it's supposed to be a proposition of a win-win, in the sense that on one side, business can, make its money, but on the other hand, it has to advance the community, society, economy in which it's operating. Yeah. So, it's supposed to be beneficial for both teams here.
Well, because now we teach, here in the business school, we teach our management students about the so-called triple bottom line.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There you go. That's what this is, essentially. Yeah, that's Elkington. So it's, a different... I feel like saying a different scholar. This was CSV was proposed by Porter and Kramer, and
different competing paradigms. Is that?
Yeah. exactly. And I think Porter and Kramer were very clever, because they made it very actionable for business. So business, I think, liked the proposition in the sense that it involved 3 strategies. All you had to do is kind of reconceive products that you had potentially, depending where you were at in your starting your business or within your business life cycle. So it could be something like, reinforcing a product that you had to make it more beneficial for the community that you were in. One example that they advertise is a company that added essential nutrients to a spice product that was really, really commonly used in India, and it helped overcome problems with anemia, etc., because essentially it added iron, etc., the essential nutrients to overcome those nutritional deficiencies. And another strategy is to simply redefine the value chain and the productivity chain by, potentially reducing packaging waste or cutting delivery routes, right? Or buying from local farmers. So they're quite easy concepts, to activate, I feel like saying. And then another strategy for that they said was integral to this paradigm was the partnering or the clustering in certain areas, getting together with government or other organizations that worked on a local level and promoting or, getting involved in infrastructure builds, etc. That helped, obviously, on one hand, the organization in terms of potentially deliveries, etc., but also, on the other hand, the local community.
Yeah.
So for me, again, like how am I tying these together? So I had the diaspora, very, very influential group of people. Business, on the other hand, also integral or fundamental to getting sustainability on track, because without citizens, government, business involved in the project,
yep,
not really going to fly off the shelf, is it? So I really wanted to look at how we can support, or how I can support the business message, right? And also I think it relates to my background. The problem with that was, as I found, not only sustainability is, whilst it's a global project, right? Because it obviously affects all of us. It's primarily guided by countries of the northern hemisphere, right? Mm-hmm. It's and I'll tell you later when you talk, or when you look at how the Sustainable Development Goals were negotiated and put into place, and the involvement that the southern communities or the global south had within that process, it will make your jaw drop. It was just blew me away. This one particular study that I'd learned about the involvement of the global south. So in any case, the same applies for business. They often create these CSV initiatives in the northern hemisphere, but they do it for the southern hemisphere because, right, or the countries of the global south, I should say, which is essentially the developing nations. Because essentially that's the premise of sustainability, right? To leave nobody behind. Mm-hmm. But obviously that means that it requires a lot of know-how and understanding of what do these countries actually need? What are the issues? And again, what are the cultural values, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
It always kind of boils back down to that cultural thing that I feel so strongly about. And that kind of takes me to that final point, how combining these first two can be an opportunity for sustainability. Mm-hmm. So as I said, I learned that, there were differences in terms of how people in the north view sustainability to how people in the south view sustainability. And I mean, maybe I should explain north and south. So when we're talking about the global north, we're talking about developed countries such as America, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, etc. And when we're talking about the global south, or the south, as I say, short, we're talking developing economies, mainly countries in Africa, Asia, a lot of Asia, etc. So the research suggests that the perspectives on sustainability, or the prioritizations, are very different. So whilst the people in the north are preoccupied, let's say, with the environment, mm-hmm, the people in the south are still thinking about poverty, gender equality, etc.
They don't necessarily have the luxury of thinking about,
Exactly. And so, the interpretations and understandings of sustainability as a concept, because it's such a wide one. And whilst there is, there's a general global understanding that, it's all about preserving or meeting the needs of people now. So and without destroying the needs of the people in the future, right? There are so many intricacies in terms of what sustainability entails, so many parameters that are still part of the picture. So it's not only about the environment, it's also about society, and it's also about the economy, right? There are these three fundamental pillars that are part of sustainability, and different stakeholders or different people will have different priorities and different levels of focus. So that often then leads to these trade-offs, right? So, what's more important? Is it more important to create agricultural land and cut down trees, or is it more important to have the trees for the biodiversity and, breathing the air that we have? So yeah, it's a really tricky and problematic situation that we're in, especially since most of the frameworks, especially the Sustainable Development Goals that I mentioned earlier, there's 17 of them, and they range from trying to eradicate poverty and hunger to encouraging climate action, responsible consumption and production, to peace and partnerships, right? And these goals are supposed to work holistically. Like, so you're not supposed to just pick one and go, oh, I'll go with that one, and that's my deed done. You're supposed to be looking at them together because they are so interconnected, right? As I said, so if you're thinking about eradicating hunger and creating more food, it could have, if you're not doing it the right way, have an impact on biodiversity, and so that that would be another goal. So it's a very challenging situation.
Indeed.
And that it varies obviously on the setting that we're in. It varies on the stakeholders that you might be talking to. You're going to have very different perspectives when you're talking to an employee of an oil company than you would if you're talking to the environmental activist, right?
Absolutely.
So it's really hard to find that common ground, right? And, it gets back to what I was saying earlier, that potentially trying to send this blanket message, this global message, is a bit tricky, right? And I think the more we actually maintain a global coherence but tap into the cultural nuances, the more we're going to have a message that might resonate and create engagement, and hence that activation that we so need. So as I was doing my research and digging into the differences between the North and the South, and this North-South divide, that so many scholars are talking about, I came across this incredible study which showed how underrepresented the people of the South actually had been in the process, and I think that's really what cemented my conviction that I had to do this, because essentially at these hearings, at these negotiations for the goals, they had public hearings that were part of the negotiation process, and within that, 26% of the contributions that were made were from developing countries. 26% only, even though they represent 83% of the population.
Right.
Okay. But what struck me even more, because that's kind of, 3%, right? 3%, 1, 2, 3, were representatives from the countries India, China, South Africa, and Brazil combined, right? Those four countries were represented by 3% in the negotiation process, even though I think they account for 40% of the worldwide population, right? So you kind of go, well, there's a little bit of an imbalance here, especially when you then read that, 75% of the representations were made by countries from the OECD, even though they represent only 17% of the worldwide population. So there was a clear misrepresentation, or I would say underrepresentation of the Southern communities there, and particular from the public of the Southern communities, because even those 26% of the representations, they were made by, NGOs and groups that represented the people, so not really the people themselves. And fair enough, it's probably very difficult to talk to people in remote areas in a lot of these countries. But that's when I'm kind of going, well, maybe talk to the people that represent these people elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
Like the diasporas.
Yeah.
It's kind of my thing, right? Yeah. I think I've said it often enough by now. So my mission essentially became, let's get a deeper understanding how a Southern community, like a Southern diaspora, understands and perceives and values sustainability in the first place, right? Because everybody's saying, oh, okay, their focus is on the societal aspect of sustainability rather than the environmental one. So, maybe there has to be a shift in the focus in terms of communication, etc. So in essence, the idea was, let's try and, create a narrative, a sustainability narrative that is just a little bit more culturally nuanced, right?
Yep.
Rather than taking that global blanket point of view. So how did I tackle the project? Essentially, I set up a mixed method study, which started with qualitative research. I ran 7 focus groups in Sydney in 2022, and then that was followed up by an Australian-wide online survey that I just finished in August. So those results are still a little bit fresh in my mind, but I feel I can talk about or talk to the outcomes from the focus groups. I mean, I've had a little, look already at the quantitative outcomes, and I was happy to say that they corroborate what I found in the qual.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so that was
it's encouraging.
Yes, exactly, encouraging and a bit of a relief. So let me tell you a little bit maybe about what I've found so far, because I'm starting to feel quite passionate about this outcome. So essentially the way I structured the research was that first people had to tell me how they understood sustainability in an unprompted way. So, generally, how do you understand what sustainability is? And if you had to say it in a very basic way, what would you say, etc. And the outcome clearly said that, the general understanding is related to the environmental sustainability, right? So people felt that the prevailing message that was connected to what sustainability was it's about preservation of the planet.
Yep.
Okay. So they reiterated that this message was not only sent by the media, of course, and the governments. It was also that's something that was transmitted through the schools. It was something that the business promoted. It was, be that, no more plastic bags or no more plastic packaging, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really how they felt. And it was quite clear as, they were talking about this approach to sustainability, that it was a much more tangible and relatable answer to sustainability for them. They were all going, well, we've all encountered a climate disaster recently, floods, heat waves, drought, it was very, very relatable, right? As they were saying, it happens all the time now. That's just part of life.
Yeah.
Is much more straightforward. And a lot of them, had learned the reduce, reuse, recycle mantra, right? The 3 R's. So, I mean, it was also a really easy way to sum up sustainability, right? So it became the answer, first off, unprompted, that's what sustainability is.
Yep.
And I think the other thing that appealed about this definition was that it gave that personal agency. I can actually do something here. I can recycle my waste. I can not use plastic. I can, have a keep cup for my coffee in the morning, etc. So it made them feel that they were contributing to sustainability, right? So that's kind of how it started in terms of what sustainability meant. And it became really clear that it was a message that had been indoctrinated, even in India, right?
Right.
So that global message of sustainability, climate action, environment, etc., was something that was promoted or institutionalized even across India. They were all telling me about, their geography lesson in year 10 that was now becoming, integral to the teaching system that addressed sustainability and that talked about sustainability through the 3 R's, for example, right? So, even the people that had arrived less than 6 months ago were looking at it from that point of view.
Yeah,
okay?
Interesting.
So it was very interesting, because, I was kind of going,
I was going to ask if that was an effect of the Australian values making it back to.
Yes,
but,
and that was part of my, the way I had set up the group. So I had separated the people that arrived or had just arrived from the ones that had lived here 5+ years, right? To see if, there was that influence that the Australian culture would have had on them. But no, it was through the board. And most of my new arrivals had only been here a couple of months, right? Between 6 months, I think, was the longest. So, I was very surprised by that. But what was interesting then was when I then put sustainability into situ, if you want, like by giving prompts that related to India, right? So essentially what I did is I visualized or I presented photos that visualized the Sustainable Development Goals, right? So it could have been, some solar panels in India or an Indian scientist or anything of that could be visualization of the SDGs. And all of a sudden, human survival became paramount, right? So that social aspect of sustainability took front stage, right? It was about, clean water is really important. And of course, food, we need to feed people first. And we need to make sure they're healthy, right? And that they can live well, etc. So it kind of shifted the conversation to being a much more social one. But then there was the realization all of a sudden that, oh my God, we can't take a global approach, right? There are variations in terms of sustainability because, yes, sustainability isn't only about the environment, it's also about society and it's also about the economy, even though the economic factor really wasn't considered very important. It was more of an enabler for the other two, right? Rather than being, something that would take front stage. But what they also, or what also became very clear is that social part of sustainability is a lot more complicated because it's so diverse, right? And it requires such flexibility and it's so much, in many instances, not relatable, right? Because even though we're from India or the participants were from India, they weren't necessarily living in poverty in a rural area.
Right.
In the mountains somewhere, right? And it also, I think gender equality really brought that complexity home for me because, as I read, gender equality is going to be really important for these people because there's a lot of work to do there. And yet my participants were going, oh, no, that's put that last, but that will come with other things, that's covered with education, etc. When you ask them face value. But as the conversations were had, I could tell that for them it was important that girls had education, that girls had equal rights, that girls were involved in decision making, that women were fundamental in getting sustainability off the ground. So whilst on face value, they didn't agree with the term as such or the concept, it was still something that they felt was necessary for their community.
They were living.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. But they, when asked, where would you put this in terms of priority? Literally, the majority put it at the bottom of the list, which really surprised me. But I felt that really part of the justification was for them is that it's just different. Gender equality means different things to different people. So in Australia, you're talking about the pay gap, but in India, it's about getting an education. And also, they were saying it's just not real to ask, a poor father of 5 to, invest a lot into his daughters when he has 3 sons, let's say, because these daughters are going to eventually marry. And when they marry, they become part of the husband's family. And so better investment is to make sure the son gets the education, because that, feeds back into the family.
Yeah, and speaks to how, like you were saying before, that there's the religious and the cultural, and it's confusing.
Exactly. It is. And I'm sure that, as they kept saying and reiterating that even within India, there would be dramatic differences in terms of how that would be approached and how that would be viewed and how that would be seen. And so it just showed that, such a goal such as, gender equality cannot be applied equally across the globe. It just
there's not a universal.
No, there's no universal gender equality. So it just needs to be addressed with these cultural nuances in place.
That's what, correct me if I'm mistaken, but that's one of the sustainability goals.
Yes,
isn't it?
absolutely.
Gender equity. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So there's gender equity, and then there is reduced inequalities, which is kind of within the countries, reduce the inequalities, and amongst countries, right? So that north-south divide as well, right? Yeah. Both of those were not. Were not as important.
Not front of mind.
Not front of mind. No, it was a real debate between survival and the planet. And that's kind of, that's where it got stuck. So you had the advocates that were going, well, how are we going to live if there's no more planet? And then the others that were saying, but if there are no people, the whole premise of sustainability is redundant, right? And it was a real stalemate. It was just not resolvable because, of course, you couldn't on one hand argue, well, let's just let the planet die. And equally, could you argue, well, let's let the people die. Let's let them starve, and not help them in terms of health, etc. So it was a real dilemma. It was quite interesting to watch, because I let them essentially try to solve the problem amongst themselves. They had to do this in a group activity, right? And so many of them then, and this was also reiterated in my quant, was the way to solve this dilemma was education. So it was, again, obviously something that as the participants themselves saw as the reason that they understood what sustainability was, and they saw as the way out, as the opportunity to, change their lives and create a viable lifestyle that otherwise, might have not been possible. So education just became that cornerstone, that new cornerstone, that way that, you could couple these two narratives, the environmental and the social one, and get sustainability back on track. And it kind of relates back to that whole premise of children as change agents, right? Just that grassroots, from the grassroots, which was also very integral to the way they approach sustainability, because it was a bit like, take your time. Every grain of sand, creates a beach. We don't need to create these things overnight. it can happen slowly, but if it happens slowly, it will happen well. That was I found the general feeling there.
And there's a bit of a generational component to that too, right? Because
So.
I'm what they call offensively a geriatric millennial. I don't love the geriatric term, but millennials are pretty progressive, but then Gen Z after them are even more progressive, and now my son is in what's going to be Generation Alpha, and I guess we'll see how progressive they are.
They will be, yeah.
Yeah. But it seems like generation on generation, I don't know if it's accept a broader acceptance of the fact that we have a problem here.
Yep.
And if we don't act now, or at least start the action now, in many ways it's already too late.
Yes.
We're seeing the effects, as you said, in terms of the environment.
Yes.
So I'm curious, did you see do you think that might be a component of what you found here?
For sure. I think so. In particular, in these groups, they were aged between 19 and 35, pretty much, roughly. I think there was one 36-year-old. So that kind of covers the millennials.
I think that's the geriatric cutoff. You'd be about 35, 36.
There you go. Well,
and
there
I'm 39.
So I think that's why there was a relatively unified approach to this. But I did have I took two groups I talked to were Australians.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to see whether there was there's a really striking difference between the Australian identity and the Australian culture and the Indian one. And interestingly, they all had the same kind of debates. The Australians, I think, were they labored and slaved over their activities a lot more, and there was a lot more discussion. The Indian participants were a lot more pragmatic, I felt, and a lot of that I felt was driven by their positivity, because they really felt that if we started, if you first of all, if you contribute on a personal level, that helps.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so every little baby step contributes to the overall cause, and they also, I think, felt that yes, things were getting bad, but it could still be fixed. You really got that message from them, which I thought was very interesting.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's kind of where I'm at in terms of my findings at this stage.
Yeah, nice one. I ask everybody the same last two questions, and the first is, what's on the horizon for you now that you are nearing the end of your PhD journey? It is stage 3 of 3 here at UTS, so you'll do that in March, you said, or that's the goal?
Yep, that's the goal.
And then finish thereafter. Are you looking to do any travel, maybe some conferences? What's on the horizon?
Look, what's on the horizon? I mean, it feels at the moment that this, finishing this monster project is really all encompassing. But in terms of what do I dream, or what would I love the outcome of this project to be, is ideally it would be great if this research model, the way I addressed this question, or this, communicating, getting a more culturally nuanced communication model and sustainability out there, would be great if I had the opportunity to do this with another diaspora, or perhaps even, again, with the Indian diaspora, but at a larger scale, so that it becomes, I feel like saying, a little bit more persuasive in terms of numbers,
Sure.
Given that the audience would be business, so they probably respond well to this combination of a little bit of depth and a lot of breadth, in terms of the numbers. So I would really love to take the project, to spread it a little bit, to use it, to use the approach, to use the methodology and the premise with other groups. I think there's a lot of merit there that I feel could be used. But on a more personal note, I think before, I would start those bigger projects and expanding that, I think a little like travel definitely will be part of the agenda. Yeah, I can see myself going to Europe for an extended period of time,
For holidays.
Yeah, for holidays.
Yeah, okay.
extended holidays. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Is there anywhere in particular that you'd like to go?
Oh, I would, always go back to Germany, obviously, reconnect with the motherland. But also, I'd love to return to France. I've got, as I said, I lived there. So a lot of the places that I lived in, I've got connections in, I've got friends that I would like to see. So I'd feel like I'd have to do the tour of the friends, and then you can never leave Europe without exploring yet another country. So it would have to, explore.
Find somewhere new.
Something new, yeah. So
nice
a bit of old and a bit of new would have to be part of the agenda.
Excellent. Well, this is maybe this is even the answer to the last question. I always like to ask something not PhD related that is exciting to you at the moment.
Yeah, the thought of traveling is really exciting. The thought of being finished is, first off, super exciting, or, when that will happen, or that light, that's kind of shining in the distance there. And then the idea of traveling and, just not thinking and reading and writing. I think that is really exciting.
And then inevitably, as you mentioned at the very beginning of our conversation, the seed was planted with the PhD, and then you found yourself moving around, and then it sort of germinated and grew and sprouted, and maybe the same thing will happen with your project as you travel around. Yeah,
it's really interesting you say that, because through a recent conference that I was at, I actually met this lovely American professor who is really, really active in a group that is based in Germany. And so, of course, we talked a lot about Germany and sustainability, etc. And I kind of, we kind of agreed that it would be great to get together in the future, perhaps in Germany, and take the conversation further. So, I've kind of lived my life relying a lot on serendipity. So I'm kind of waiting and seeing where the end will take me, with a little bit of guidance, maybe, with a little bit of nudging here and there. But it would be lovely if, something like that could come out of it. For sure.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for taking the time to sit down and talk with me. This has been really interesting.
Yeah, thank you. No, thanks for having me. It was great having a chat.
I wish you all the best through the end.
Thank you. Thank you so much.